I want to get to what really opened me up to Jesus as the way home, because it wasn't just the marks coming up on my feet after feeling my suffering merge with his. That absolutely was a big part of it. But what really got me was the sudden and mind-blowing realization of the epic biblical scale of the spiritual warfare that was actually playing out through everything that was unfolding through my personal spiritual awakening. And the realization that no matter how much meditation I tried to do, no matter how much love I poured into my life, no matter how many crystals I had, no matter how patient I'd learned to be, no matter how brave I'd become, no matter how much sage I smudged my home with, there were demons arriving on the scenes, intimidating me in my home, on top of all the worldly challenges I was already battling. And I just found myself in a place of not wanting to prove myself against all this stuff any longer. But yet, I knew that something had been preventing me on the spiritual journey from just letting go and taking a full leap of faith in total trust of this universe or this benevolent field of love. I knew something divine had been talking to me and impacting my life in profound ways daily for many years, and showing me the interconnectedness of everything and the high level of intelligent orchestration that constantly left me completely awestruck. But the only way I can start to get at what it felt like to have this revelation that Jesus is the face of my loving Creator is that if you found a large deposit of money in your bank account and the bank couldn't trace it, who put it there, and just shrugged and told you that, I guess you're lucky. And then this anonymous donor just kept the money flowing, and it felt quite mysterious, and you weren't quite sure if you could just totally relax and enjoy the money, or if something untoward was actually happening, or if you just spent it all, that it might suddenly stop and you wouldn't have wanted to, fully let go so much that you quit your job and allowed yourself to become too dependent on this mysterious abundance flow, because there's no face to it. In many ways, I felt like I knew God intimately, but yet I'd been making this decision to call God the universe or source or the field of loving consciousness. I kept it pretty vague, and I saw Jesus as just one of many ascended masters to have walked the earth after having cleared their acquired limiting mental programming to return to their natural state of pure loving awareness. But it was when this mysterious, beautiful force that had been guiding me and giving me the message over and over that I was being guided home, tied up everything it had been showing me over these years all together in black and white in front of my eyes in the Bible, showing me the scale and seriousness of the warfare that was taking place in my own living room, which was ramping right up as it showed me this, and that there was only one pure force that could truly protect me, and that it was Jesus. It was suddenly like my divine Creator was finally showing me in a way I couldn't possibly deny after everything that I'd gone through. This is who I am. This is my face. This is my name. I love you. You are so tired, but you can let yourself fall into me. I've got you. And after everything that I'd gone through, I was so exhausted and so ready to just surrender and let him take that battle on for me and just let myself rest and be loved and supported for once. It's when I really understood finally the paradox my journey had been trying to teach me, that you can't separate yourself from the interconnected whole. Happiness and love do come from within, and no, we can't rely on the external world to supply them, because that would make our peace and worthiness conditional on things going our way. And we know that life doesn't work like that. Circumstances are always shifting, but at the same time, we also don't generate happiness and meaning in isolation by cutting ourselves off and convincing ourselves that we're so strong, so sovereign, so self-sufficient that we don't need anyone or anything. That is not strength. That is self-protection masquerading as wholeness. And we weren't created to do this life alone. The kingdom of God is within you, but it doesn't come from turning your ego into God. It's relational, not a one-way street. Buddhism had already shown me the paradox of life, that suffering and joy arise together, that we're never separate from the whole, and that clinging to what we love is actually what creates pain. And it helped me see that everything is connected and that peace is found in stillness and in letting go. But what it didn't fully give me was someone to let go into. The idea of a loving field of awareness was beautiful, but vague. It was so expansive that it was hard to feel held by it. And I longed for something more intimate. A God who could look me in the eyes and walk beside me in the dirt and understand my humanity because he wore it. And that's what changed everything. The moment I stopped seeing Jesus as an external savior and started seeing him as the very heart of God, made relatable and reachable and real. Because if God made us in his image and we're biologically wired for relationship, then it makes perfect sense that we wouldn't be fully satisfied by an impersonal force field of light that's too infinite for our human comprehension, no matter how loving it is. We were created for communion, and Jesus is the bridge, not as an escape from our pain, but as a gateway in to a divine relationship that includes us and that transforms us and that restores us back to who we were always meant to be, which is brilliant, magnificent, unique fractals of the divine, but in human form, with an ego that forgets that it's not God, even though that part of us likes to deny God and play God, but in reality is just the vehicle through which a fractal of something much, much larger and grander that is God can express through and experience himself through. I thought the Bible was nothing more than a storyline that humans had become attached to and limited by. And I had attached my own storyline that it was too much of a chaotic mess of human distortions and misinterpretations and poor translations and nonsense to bother consulting as any kind of guide to this spiritual awakening that I was experiencing. So in order to give meaning to what was shown to me in the Bible and what unraveled my storyline, that the divine I was in correspondence and relationship with had very little to do with the God of the Bible, requires some context. And so I'd like to try to tell some of the story of what I'd been experiencing in this lead up to this moment of revelation. And so today I'm going to start with how God began to teach me about the energetics of Christ as I went through a journey of longing for my other half. This is the story of how my search for wholeness, like spiritually, emotionally, and biologically, led me out of trauma, through illusion, and into sacred inner union. At first, I thought my other half referred to the man I married young, someone who, in hindsight, was never truly aligned with my soul. That relationship was born from trauma and shaped by the blueprint of our childhood attachment wounds and a desperate hunger for emotional safety. I didn't know it back then, but I was trying to complete something in me through someone else. That's what we do when our nervous systems are wired for survival instead of love and safety. We bond to what feels familiar, even if it hurts and depletes us. Because the truth is, we are wired for connection. That's not weakness, it's biology. Human babies literally cannot survive without attachment. And that need for emotional attunement, consistency, and co-regulation doesn't disappear when we become adults. It generally just becomes suppressed and expressed differently. And the reality is there are a lot of toddlers walking around in adults' bodies still seeking true attunement to heal their attachment wounds. Attachment theory teaches us that secure relationships are essential for nervous system regulation and our sense of safety in the world. And here's the key: emotional bonding is not the same as being attached to an outcome. You can be securely attached and still surrendered. You can love deeply without trying to control how it unfolds. It's not about needing someone to complete you. It's about mutual responsiveness, presence, and reciprocal energy investment. But in parts of the New Age spiritual world, I encountered a different narrative and belief undercurrent, particularly this idea that the highest form of spiritual evolution was complete detachment, that I shouldn't need anyone, that wanting consistency was just ego, and that craving emotional depth was a sign that I hadn't healed enough. And so for a while, I tried to become the untouchable woman, the sovereign queen, the floating bubble of self-sourced light, this independent warrior woman who didn't need anybody else, but who secretly really, really, really longed for connection and to be held in stable, loving, masculine containment. I'd never experienced that in my life. And during my marriage, which had been a 16-year relationship all up, I desperately longed to be met at my deepest depths and loved and seen and held right. But we were just stuck in the anxious avoidant trap. The more I chased him to choose me, the more he pulled away and made sure I knew that I was too much. And so the more unloved and alone I felt. Robin Williams once said, "I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up all alone." It's not. The worst thing in life is ending up with people who make you feel alone. And that summed up my marriage. Then one day, I read this line that articulated how I felt perfectly. And it said, "May you find somebody who speaks your soul language so you don't spend the rest of your life trying to translate your soul." I didn't know it then, but God was already setting the stage. Reading that line, I hit this moment of deep inner turmoil. I knew I couldn't possibly do that to myself until death do us part, but I also couldn't see a way out of the marriage because it would mean tearing my family apart and breaking my children's hearts. And I couldn't see how I could stand on my own 2 feet financially, particularly in the current economic climate, while also staying true to my soul in terms of keeping my children out of the system, which was now threatening to potentially inject my precious children with DNA altering bioweapons. But you see, God is the greatest storyteller, and I just hadn't yet realized that one of the many plot twists was about to drop. So in July of 2020, I had this terrible argument with my then husband, which ended in him interrogating me, "Well, if I don't make you happy, what kind of man do you think could possibly make you happy?" And suddenly, I went completely inward, and I began contemplating this seriously for the first time in my life. Something was just absolutely stirring in my soul, and I actually started listing qualities out loud, even though I knew it wouldn't mean anything to my then husband. And he shook his head and said, "Well, I don't know where you think you're going to find a man like that. And if such a man even exists, what on earth makes you think that you would ever find him?" And so in my super low worth state, believing what he'd said, I went to cry, realizing how unrealistic it seemed that I would get to experience the love and partnership that I longed for, in this lifetime. And so now, first, rewind 2 weeks from that day, I had met the most incredible psychic business coach who was helping me come back to my authentic soul-led self, to align to my ideal soul clients. And I had told her that I wanted to learn this specific subconscious rewiring modality called Psych K as part of my dream to help others. But I had massive blocks to investing in myself, and I didn't see how I could spend the money and the time as a full-time mother. So while she'd been trying to pull me up to my highest path and overcome the voice of that inner critic that told me I wasn't worth the investment, I'd been promising her that I would book in. But sneakily, I had no intention of really booking in for the upcoming training. But sometimes God has to do shocking things to get us to wake up. And on that day, 2 weeks prior to that argument that I'd had, she had unexpectedly and mysteriously passed away, leaving me determined to honor her and honor my precious human life that I still had and still get to live by keeping my promise to her, getting out of my own way and booking in to do this course. It was like there was some force quietly urging me to follow my soul. I could feel that something in me was pressurized, like ready to break, and something had to happen for it to break, but I couldn't see what that could be yet. So then, fast forward 2 weeks after I'd had this argument with my then husband, and I show up for this training workshop, and I'd had to travel a long way from my home through the mountains via public transport, and I realized the bus timetable once I got to the city made no sense and had huge gaps. So I asked around to some of the women doing the course if anyone could give me a lift back to the station at the end of the days of the course. And I specifically didn't ask any of the men because I'd had a bad experience with a predatory male, and I didn't want to end up alone in a car with some unknown man, just in case. But for some unknown reason, the women who'd driven all came up with some vague, awkward reason as to why they couldn't drop me by the station on their way home, which struck me as a strange thing. And then, without me noticing, one of these well-meaning women went to ask the men, not realizing that I hadn't wanted to get myself into that position. And she came back to tell me that this one particular bloke had offered to give me the lift that I needed for the week. And I was mortified to hear this. And I asked her nervously who this guy was. And at that moment, most of the attendants of the course walked into the room through these open double doors, and like a cheesy movie, the crowd parted and one man was revealed in the middle. And the woman said, "That's him." And our eyes met, and all of my fears dissolved, and I knew that my soul was safe with him. And I couldn't process it fully at the time, but looking into his eyes felt like I was home. Like, not back at my house, but like heaven, eternal love and peace, God hold us kind of home. Not romantic though, not even at all, but it was profound. So then I snapped out of it because the class was beginning. And so then during that week, I got to know this man along with the others in my class, and I felt like I'd finally found my soul tribe. I felt so happy and blessed. But the woman who teed up the lift with this man kept remarking over and over how similar this man and I were. And I did notice too, but I brushed it off. It felt a little bit awkward the way she kept circling back to it, like she saw something that I wasn't quite ready to see. Then, on the final day of the course, the instructor gave a closing talk that pierced something deep in me. I was on such a high, feeling this deep sense of belonging and fulfillment and excitement and joy. And he said something like, this modality was divinely gifted to us for this time of spiritual warfare and great awakening. So get out there and use it. And then he said the words, "It's go time." And at that exact moment, a glass bottle of table water, so one that had just been sitting quietly, undisturbed at room temperature all day, suddenly just cracked and broke into 3 distinct pieces. And the water just rushed out over the table and the floor. It didn't tip over, it wasn't touched, it simply shattered. So we all jumped up in surprise, just instinctively coming together to clean it up. And when we sat back down, there was this hushed reverence in the room, like just a stunned silence. Like we all knew something sacred and otherworldly had just occurred. And looking back, I see now that the bottle breaking in 3 was not just coincidence. It was prophetic, like a divine omen, a physical manifestation of the internal and spiritual shattering that was happening within me. Like it marked a significant shift away from separation consciousness, the illusion that we're apart from one another or apart from God. the 3 pieces of glass I now recognize as the symbol of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The moment the bottle broke was the moment my inner self cracked open to receive something far greater than the modality that we just learned. It was the beginning of my initiation into this state of divine union. And the bottle breaking wasn't destruction, it was a liberation. I had been the bottle, contained and defined by old beliefs and old traumas and old limits. And now I was being undone, poured out and made new. So the 3 parts could come back and not be reassembled like as they were, but to be integrated and resurrected as one in Christ. So sitting back down in awe at this supernatural happening, I was now completely absorbed at what the instructor was saying. I was so moved by the whole experience and everything that we just journeyed through in this course, and busting to get home and start using this modality with clients and family and on myself more. But then out of nowhere, I felt faint, and it freaked me out because it felt the same as when I'd had blackouts from the acute pancreatitis that I'd almost died of a few years back. I was almost going to get someone's attention to say that I was going to pass out, but then I lost my hearing and I just went fully inward to myself. What I didn't realize at the time was that my body wasn't breaking down, it was breaking open. My nervous system didn't need saving, it was actually delivering the message that my mind couldn't yet receive. So suddenly I became aware of heat or warmth and oxytocin rising up through my body. I felt like I was head over heels in love and absolutely filled with butterflies, but it confused the hell out of me because I knew I wasn't in love with anyone. My then husband had lost my heart years before that when he'd emotionally abandoned me while I'd been deadly ill. So in my mind, I said to myself, what is going on? And suddenly, involuntarily, my head just jolted up and looked straight at this man. And I freaked out and I looked back down, hoping no one had noticed. And as I'm trying to work out what is happening to me, then my vision just blacks out. And I went fully inside myself and I was shown like a movie reel. The scene from 2 weeks prior when I'd had that argument with my then husband, and I would see myself list one quality of my ideal man, and then I would see a replay of the way in which this man had revealed during the week that he ticked that box, even though I hadn't been consciously aware of the connection at the time. And it played through every single quality on my list, which I hadn't even thought about again since I'd spoken it. And I was shocked to see it played back to me like I was just watching it play out, and like it was coming from somewhere beyond my internal memory. So then it got even more intense, and I was shown what I feel were other lives lived with this man. And I'll explain more about that one day, because later more was revealed to confirm what I'd been shown. So even if you don't believe in past lives, it felt like I had known his soul for eternity. But in that room that day, I snapped out of this intense experience, and soon I heard the instructor announce that the class was finished. And suddenly this man was in front of me with arms wide open, saying my name, ready to give me a huge hug goodbye. And I had to massively suppress what I just experienced, because if somebody had have asked me if I was okay, I wouldn't have known what to say. So I just pretended to myself that nothing had happened. And then This man dropped me to the station one last time, and as he drove me to Central Station in Sydney, we were both on such a high that he absent-mindedly just drove straight through a major intersection right in the middle of a busy city through a red light. And halfway through the intersection, we both freaked out, realizing he'd run the red light because there had been traffic tearing through and it was pouring with rain, so it was hard to see. But not a single car entered the intersection, and we somehow got through unharmed. And just as we caught our breath from realizing that we both got through, we both suddenly noticed a police car right there on the side of the road, and you could feel both our hearts sink because we knew it'd result in, like a massive fine or even worse. But we just drove on, and the cops didn't even notice us. It was so bizarre. We were both just silent, like trying to work out how all of that had just happened. And I had this strong sense like we had this force field around us, like really a powerful force field protecting us, and actually making a point of showing us that we were protected. But I couldn't work out what it was or why it was happening. And it just added to my internal overwhelm at everything that had just unfolded in that last wacky hour of my life. Like, it was a lot. So he dropped me off, and he began his big 5 or 6 hour journey back up north to where he was living, and I ran through the pouring rain and I hopped on an empty train to begin my journey back home. And as soon as I was alone, I just fell apart. Like, I started crying harder than I felt I'd cried in a long, long time, and I couldn't even explain why. It was like my soul knew that I had just met the man who understood my soul, the man who I had spoken out loud somehow into existence and met despite the odds. But I knew that I was married and that he lived a million miles away, and there was no way that I could ever realistically be with him. And it just crushed me. It's like it had hit my deepest pain point and emphasized just how trapped and doomed I was. And so we messaged each other, like, just briefly when we got home to say how great the course had been, and then we didn't talk again. And I went deeply into denial about how he made me feel, and I was determined that I could keep my family together and keep on with my initial plans to bring my boys a sister into the world, because the show must go on, right? And I'd also had an intense inner knowing that I had a daughter that I needed to bring earthside. Like, I could feel her and I yearned for her. I missed her so bad that it ached, and that longing was deeper than any longing to leave my marriage and split up my family and potentially not get to bring this daughter of mine here to be with me. It was the focus that God brought into my life. So despite feeling deep disconnect in my marriage, we tried for another baby. And I now see how when God has planned something for you, you can try all that you like to avoid destiny, but you can't outrun what is meant for you. And I do believe in soul contracts, and that the larger aspect of myself beyond my earthly ego of form or identity or mind had agreed with God before I came here that I would have this daughter. So then, as I was pregnant with her, I had hoped the pregnancy would bring my then husband and I back closer together. But he became more distant than ever, and my heart couldn't actually take anymore. I knew I hadn't come to this planet for this to be my grandest experience of love and partnership. I'd already told him that I'd given up on being the only one who was willing to work at the marriage, and that he lost me for good. But yet, I just didn't know how to leave. Now, with 2 little kids and another on the way, I had to take my wedding ring off because I'd had dermatitis flare up underneath it so bad. And that was a message from my body that I needed separation from this relationship that was not in alignment with what my soul knew I was worthy of. And I was crying myself to sleep every night, feeling so lost and alone and confused. And then one day, I listened to something that spoke about the Christ consciousness being awakened through the activation of our crystalline light bodies, so that we can anchor the energy of divine love into form and bring about a new earth where we're all united as one. And it said that the crystalline grid is a synonym of the Christ consciousness grid. And for some reason, the word crystalline just stuck in my head. And all week, I just kept hearing that word over and over. I could feel something was on the verge of unfolding. My soul knew huge shifts were coming and that I couldn't remain stagnant. And then the floodgates just flew open on my heart, and I couldn't deny what I had repressed about how I felt about this man that I'd met at the course. And I started thinking about the whole strange, intense experience I'd had a whole year now before. And I didn't know how to navigate how much emotion and overwhelm was coming up in me. And so I cried out to God, still not really knowing if there really was a God, but just from sheer desperation. Okay, please, if you are listening, and if this man is meant to be in my life, give me a sign. Make him message me. I will not reach out to him. He has to message me, and soon enough that I know that it is a divine sign. And then I thought to myself, what a dumb thing to say. Obviously, that's impossible, and it's not likely that anything or anyone could have even heard my request. And so I went to bed feeling totally unhopeful and defeated by life. And I just cried myself to sleep at how depressing everything felt. And then the next day, I just made some lunch and I suddenly had a hunch to stop what I was doing and to check Facebook for some reason. And there was a new message in my inbox. And it was the man. I was so overcome that I felt my whole body go weak in disbelief that my request actually had been answered. So then, looking at the date of our last message, there had been exactly a year between messages. And that was a long time for this to be a random coincidence. And within hours of asking for this specific sign, it sent me into a total spin. Oh my gosh, maybe there is an actual God. But surely he couldn't want me to leave my marriage and break apart my children's world. So then that evening I was doing some work down in my backyard, down by the fire in my backyard, and I had headphones in and I was listening to music, and a song started up that made me stop what I was doing and think of him for some unknown reason. And I thought to myself, could it have been a real divine sign? And then a woman sings the lines, "Do you always trust your first initial feeling?" And I remembered the first time I looked in his eyes and somehow knew that it was safe, like home. Special knowledge holds true, there's believing. I turned around and the water was was closing all around, like a glove, like the love that had finally found me. And I knew in the crystalline knowledge of you. Crystalline. She just sung the word crystalline. What is going on? Drove me through the mountain, through the crystal like a clear water fountain. Drove me like a magnet to the sea. Oh my gosh. And that calling to attend that workshop, which I had only gone to because my coach had literally died, kicking me into action, had been so strong that it had driven me through the mountains to attend the workshop, which was held right on the waterfront by the sea. And then I realized it was the music from a movie that I loved as a child called Practical Magic. And it plays as an instrumental score music as one of the girls casts a true love spell, Amas Veritas, listing the qualities of her ideal man.
Hear my call a mile away. Your whistle, my favorite song. You can ride a pony backwards.
What are you doing?
Summoning up a true love spell called Amas Veritas. He can flip pancakes in the air. He'll be marvelously kind. His favorite shape will be a star. And he'll have one green eye and one blue. Thought you never wanted to fall in love. That's the point. The guy I dreamed of doesn't exist. And if he doesn't exist, he'll never die of a broken heart.
And then it returns when the true love spell comes into fruition, and this man actually appears in her life, and this woman finally surrenders to her true self as a mystical, magical witch. Something people had always rejected her for, much like how they rejected Christ because those powers scared people's idea of reality. And she finally embraces true love without fear and curses. I was so stunned. I actually felt like I must be losing the plot because I just could not believe that all of this was actually happening. And what made it even more wild was that I had no recollection of adding that song to my music collection, and the play count on it was 0. But I had loved that song, but I'd never learnt the lyrics. The music had just always stirred something like in my soul when I'd watched that movie, particularly this string line. And I only really remember the music, but I would have listened to it lots if I knew that I had it in my collection. I hadn't even known what the song was called or who it was by. So I ended up messaging back and forth with this man, feeling like we had more and more in common than I'd even realized. We ended up having some video calls and just spoke for hours, and he actually secretly triggered me when he would speak of God. I would think, oh no, he's a Christian. Maybe not really my kind of guy. And then strange things started happening. It was like we had a telepathic connection. He would randomly answer every question I was wondering about in my mind but didn't want to ask. And he would answer out of nowhere, like not on topic. And I started to really wonder, what was happening. Then we both had a ghost experience on the exact same night. Then we both had weird energy going through our body that neither of us could put our finger on. Then, as these months went on, I was flooded with signs and messages from some powerful unseen force. Of course, I didn't call it God back then, but it was bombarding me with the message that I needed to follow what my soul was calling me to do. I knew that I needed to formally separate from my then husband. I'd already expressed clearly and explicitly many times over the years leading up to this moment that I had officially given up on our marriage and that I'd checked out. But to officially announce that it was over felt terrifying because I didn't know where to go or how to navigate a divorce as a heavily pregnant woman with nowhere to turn. I couldn't make sense of how badly my life could be falling apart right when I needed the most stability. I'd worked so hard to create a life and a home that would be a safe haven in a mad world for my children to be able to grow up in, and I couldn't contend with the idea that I might need to let it all go. But I knew that I couldn't ignore this divine truth that I needed to end the marriage. Whether I knew what was going to happen or not, I just had to jump because everything that I thought my life was going to be like was literally crumbling below my feet. So I went to tell my then husband, but all I could do was cry. My voice was blocked. I couldn't say it because I was so scared to be a homewrecker. I was so scared to shatter my children's world. But I also knew that they were miserable because they could feel my heartbreak and misery, and they couldn't be happy and feel safe and secure when their mum was suppressing the truth of her soul and abandoning herself like so thoroughly to attempt to keep everybody else happy. They couldn't feel contained in love when their parents were not creating a loving container. And I could not create a loving container with someone who actively resisted love and closeness and teamwork. And finally, he angrily blew up, saying that he knew I was going to leave him and told me he doubted I'd actually really leave and that I was just being delusional and that I'd never find anyone who would love me like I, wanted to be loved. And so I asked him if he remembered the last time he told me that, because it had turned out that the exact man I had dreamt up appeared in my life just 2 weeks after speaking his qualities out into the ether. And I told him that I couldn't deny it to myself any longer, that I was in contact with this man and that I was falling for him. And it made it real. It wasn't just my heart's not really here anymore. It was I am moving on. I can't stay here living this lie. I went into deep, deep grief and then ended up pouring my feelings out to this poor man in a desperate moment of just wanting to set all the truth free. And he went into shock because suddenly I went from a woman who he'd just seen as this like-minded friend who was happily married with a 3rd child on the way as far as he knew, to this blubbering mess professing her big feelings of the fact that she just officially ended her marriage and couldn't ignore the signs and synchronicities any longer. And he told me that he'd like to remain friends before disappearing without a trace. So there I was, just like the witch in the very first scene of that movie, Practical Magic, that I had loved so much in my childhood, heavily pregnant, outcast, waiting for true love to come and hold me, but he did not come. No one came.
She was banished to this very island. With her unborn child growing inside her belly, she waited for her lover to rescue her. But he never came. No one came. In a moment of despair, she cast a spell upon herself that she would never again feel the agony of love. But as her bitterness grew, the spell turned into a curse.
And at this point, almost all my good friends also suddenly announced that they were moving out of town out of the blue. My dad had broken the news that he'd been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I just felt like my whole life had completely fallen apart, and I was just cast into this suffocating darkness with so much grief and so much confusion about what was happening. And I'll leave it until next time to continue with where God took this all next. But just to finish up what I want to say today, I had found myself yearning after this man. I didn't know how to come to terms with what God was showing me about my connection with him, but yet his total absence and rejection. And as God began to make it clear that there was more to this story, I found myself watching a video that this man had up on Facebook of himself playing the guitar, which incidentally had been on my list that he would specifically play the guitar. And I noticed something on the wall of his bedroom in the frame of this video. And just to rewind a little in my own story, when I had first discovered the power of clearing the limits of the subconscious mind that keep us from God, I had started following an exercise which involved coming up with a personal symbol of balance to keep as a daily focal point. And the symbol that I had thought of was a pile of 3 rocks balancing on one another. And so one day I'd been walking through a shopping centre, and I just happened to notice a printed canvas in a gift shop that had an artistic image of 3 rocks balancing. And without even thinking, I just ran into the shop and went to buy it, intuitively knowing it was meant to be hung in my bedroom. And what made my jaw drop as I watched this video of this man playing was the fact that what my eye picked up on in the background was a printed canvas hanging in his bedroom with the image of 3 rocks balancing on top of one another. I could not believe we could both have the same thing in both our bedrooms, and for it to have been so personally meaningful to me. And I'd also started seeing triple numbers when I met him. And God later revealed that this triple code symbolizes the Holy Trinity. The 3 rocks, the Holy Trinity again. The glass bottle falling into 3 pieces, the Holy Trinity again. And not only did it represent the Holy Trinity, it represented a multitude of things that God was about to weave teachings on through what he was orchestrating for me. So as I entered that painful, disorientating, dark night of the soul, this deep sense of separation from the man that for reasons were beyond my rational mind felt like my other half. And I begged for guidance to show me what was happening. So God showed me that he was my sacred counterpart, but that I had to stop seeking wholeness outside of myself in another and find it through inner union with the Holy Spirit first. And then once I had reached that inner sacred marriage, or hieros gamos, where the true energetics of the Christ itself are activated through the expression and integration of the inner high dark and light masculine and inner high dark and light feminine energies. And once this occurs inwardly, then it will be reflected naturally outwardly as well through the union of myself and my divine counterpart coming together as one in God. And so the law of three reveals that all creation arises through three forces: an active or positive force, a passive or negative force, and a reconciling or neutral force. So this sacred trinity is the divine template for becoming whole. When we chase love and fulfillment outside ourselves, the energy spins in chaos like a magnet chasing its own tail. If it was a dog and had a tail, one of those magnets. But when the feminine stops seeking her other half outside of herself and surrenders to the knowing that they are already one in God, the spin settles. This is holy conciliation. And then love is no longer driven by lack or longing, but it becomes a peaceful state of being. And in this stillness, the union becomes possible, not through effort or micromanaging, but through divine alignment. God guides this journey home, not over to each other, but to the sacred center within, where all three forces reconcile and wholeness is fully realized. But somewhere along that journey, I realized that if I was leaving Jesus out of the equation and just trying to relate to some vague, incomprehensible field of loving awareness and just detaching myself from everything and being the independent, sovereign source of my own love, that I wasn't really actually getting to know my Creator. If I saw that force as just a field of pure love. And I am certain that God is so infinite that at that absolute level that my human self cannot even conceive of the magnitude of that level of infinite, eternal, perfection and intelligent wisdom. But trying to see myself as all I need, something wasn't fully translating. There was a lot of self-help that left God out of the picture, and even all this stuff about using sage and crystals and spirit animals to protect yourself and embodying Hindu goddesses to help fight different aspects of the battles in your life. The thing was, once God revealed who he was to me, once I'd started to feel his energy and trust him, suddenly anything I was using as a crutch to be able to navigate my life as a spiritual being in a human form just seemed unnecessary, like a complication. It's not like I saw this stuff and gasped, oh my God, it's witchcraft. I've been misled by the devil. I must burn my tarot cards. It was more like I realized, knowing him for what and who he really is, in all his love and power, had just dissolved this childhood mummy-daddy wound that I'd been carrying, when I was essentially walking around going, well, fuck mummy and daddy, I'll do it myself. I can't trust them. If you want something done right, you gotta do it yourself. Maybe the best that I can explain what I saw within my own behavior was, imagine you've got a bunch of young teenagers whose parents weren't able, for whatever reason, some generational curse, which I guarantee you is rooted in not having a true relationship with God. But for whatever reason, these parents are not able to show up for them and teach them communication and boundaries and provide them attunement and love to meet their needs. So they're feeling this void and they want to fill it with something. And they've seen that cigarettes and alcohol seem to be a pretty popular remedy. Their spirit doesn't really want cigarettes or alcohol, but for the part of them that's seeking soothing, it works as a substitute, something to stick in their mouth that mimics that feeling of their mother's nurturing breast that was torn away. So why do these kids not go to mummy and daddy? Well, because they don't even know what they're missing, let alone how to articulate it and get it from people who also don't even know what it is. So do they go to mummy and daddy to ask them to get some cigarettes and alcohol? Well, they might have tried, but mummy and dad said, oh no, that's too expensive. So how are the kids going to fill the void? Well, they better learn to do it on their own. So they devise a plan. They go out with a box and a sign asking for people to donate to their church. Who wants to put on a lunch for the grandparents? And then they head out to the park in the evening to find their badass cousin Medusa, because they know she has an ID and she can get the goods. And if the shop owner is suspicious and doesn't hand over the vodka and vape, that she has karate skills and she could just rob the guy. And so I saw how when the advice was, you are all you need and here are tools that you can use, with either no focus on my relationship with God or just throwing it in like an afterthought, that all of it was actually just perpetuating my mommy and daddy attachment wounds and ultimately cutting myself off from the love and abundance God wanted to pour into me. And it was like I was taking various tools from New Age spirituality to try to be in control. And then using Buddhist teachings to bypass my desire for attunement and emotional stability. And I'm not saying that God was void from the tools I was using from New Age, because he communicated and shone through them in many, many ways. And I'm not saying that Buddhism taught me to bypass, because it absolutely reconnected me to my inner strength to pick up my cross daily with Jesus and die unto myself. It just didn't teach me that Jesus was there to help me. It didn't teach me that the empty, loving void had a face and an unshakable conviction to loving and protecting me to the point it would live a human life of complete dedication to love and truth and to honor, and die an agonizing death on every level to demonstrate in action the lengths it was willing to go to forgive and care for me. Nowhere did any of this stuff I'd been following explain that I have a heavenly Father. And yes, there is absolutely the mother aspect there too. And I'm going to talk about that in another transmission. But a Father who would die for me and who would live for me in full presence and attunement. A Father who I can count on 100% to be looking out for my ultimate best interest and the ultimate best interest of the entire collective, even if we don't understand it from our human perspective. You know, well, why did you keep me separate from my one true love? Why did you take away my mother from me when I was 4 years old? Why did you kill all those babies in Gaza? Because without dark, we cannot know light. Because without suffering, we cannot know the depths of our compassionate hearts. Because without loss, we cannot know gratitude. And we all made consensual agreements with God before we came here. But we must forget, because otherwise we wouldn't live those contracts out. If you knew your daughter was about to die in a car accident, which was ultimately orchestrated to bring you back to a humble place of leaning in to God and aligning to a life of compassionate service, where you went on to help other families who had lost a loved one and helped bring humanity closer together, and realize the truth that your daughter's soul lives on, even if you knew the bigger picture, but you knew she was about to die, in the moment, you would likely instinctively prevent her from getting in that car, because it's part of your design to protect the ones you love. So we need to forget in order to allow the plan to unfold. But essentially, to leave Jesus out of the equation was what prevented me from knowing my Creator personally and isolating myself from fully receiving his love. He was always trying to pour, but I was closed off, so I could only receive a trickle. And the beautiful thing is, your ego isn't actually in control of all of this. So it's not like there's something that you have to do to receive God's love. And simply by hearing my words, energetic Christ codes are activating within you, opening you up more. And it's not my words as such. I'm just acting as an open vessel for his love and messages and energies that he commands me to speak about these conversations that I've been having with him, and obey, because I know that he is a father who is looking out for our best interests from the ultimate eagle-eye, panoramic, omnipresent view. It was something that the beautiful quantum physicist Nassim Haramein once said that made me realize why I yearned for another half, which later was ultimately revealed as simply wanting to come home to my Heavenly Father. He said, the universe doesn't do math, it doesn't do physics, it does relationships. The universe does relationships. And this directly mirrored something I'd heard God explain to Neil Donald Walsh. Relationships are sacred because they provide life's grandest opportunity, indeed its only opportunity, to create and produce the experience of your highest conceptualization of self. And suddenly that ache within me made sense. We are designed for relationship, not just with one another, but with every living thing, with the stars, with our own soul, with God. Even the tiniest particles respond to the field around them. The atom is not static, it's relational. So why should I be any different? I once thought that wholeness meant arriving at some holy island of independence, untouchable, invulnerable, content in isolation. But now I know wholeness is not isolation. It's integration. It's union with what is real, what is present, with the part of me that longs, that breaks, that bleeds, and still loves anyway. And then I met that man that I could call my twin flame, though even that phrase feels fragile under the weight of what it really means, because it was never about romance. God showed me that that will someday likely be a part of it, but the much more profound truth was that it was about recognition, resonance, a mirror held up so closely that I could no longer pretend the distortions were outside of me. God didn't give me this man to complete me. He gave me this mirror to unmake me so that I could be remade in his truth, God's truth. What I saw through that man's eyes reflecting back to me was the kingdom of God trying to emerge in me. And when he disappeared, it hurt like hell. I walked through the flames of my own living hell. But the pain wasn't punishment. It was permission. Permission to go deeper into the mystery, to stop clinging to the form and start receiving the function, like the purpose of this sacred disruption. I still longed to be held. I still yearned to be known, not from neediness, but from design. And that's how God cracked me open to receive him through Jesus. He didn't tell me to transcend my humanity. He entered into it. He didn't tell me to stop needing love and having needs. He reminded me that he was the love that I needed. And in that surrender, when I stopped trying to make sense of the ache and just let it be sacred, I discovered something more beautiful than completion. I discovered communion. So I remember when I was a little girl and my mum made this beautiful dress for a friend of mine because her mum had asked my mum if she could make her a dress for her communion ritual. And without even knowing what that even was, it triggered me. I felt angry that these kids were being lined up and forced to perform this ritual. And now I see that it's not because there's something intrinsically wrong with that, but that it offended something within my soul which knew what true communion is, and that God wants us to get real with him and be authentic, not just go through the motions like an act. He wants us to really, really have a deep, genuine, intimate relationship with him and truly lean on him like a child does to a parent that they deeply love and trust. I don't need to self-source every drop of worth anymore. I can be held and I can receive. My other half is not some man. It's the part of me that remembered that I was always made for union. Not just with someone else, like absolutely he showed me my kinship with all sentient beings, but the foundation of all of that was my inner union with him, the one who made me. And this story isn't even close to finished. It's barely even begun. And during this journey, God has guided me through the creation of a course to support whoever is called through their own chrysalis of transformation. It's not ready and up and running yet, but I've dropped a link below where you can register your interest and be notified when it is open. I also have an opportunity to share that required a big ego death for me, because to be honest, I just saw it as nothing but a ridiculous MLM pyramid scheme that I didn't want to have anything to do with. But God called me to look at it from another perspective, and he told me sternly, my daughter, your deepest yearning is to be supported. So do you really want to keep closing off to all the ways in which I open for you to receive my love and abundance? He helped me realize that not only was this leveraged income business model a way for God to funnel financial resources to me and give me this day my daily bread, but a way to actively step up in to my fullest expression as a vessel for his message. And that's literally how he's able to pour into my cup. He doesn't want us stuck in the grind. He wants us to work with him and trust him and open up to the opportunities that he gives us, and to let our storylines and fixed beliefs die and wither on that cross, and allow him to let us see with new eyes. If you want to see the opportunity that I have as a pyramid scheme, as I did, and look, I am one to call a spade, I can absolutely see that this model funnels wealth up a pyramid structure. But for just a moment, take a look at the jobs that most of the world's working population engage in. Think of all the kids spending their teen years on their feet for long hours, sweating while they deep fry Macca's chips for minimum wage. Think of all their precious energy that is being harvested for a company that is making a mozza. Is that not a pyramid scheme. Think of all the parents separated from their children, giving their precious life force energy and time to a job that would replace them overnight, while they're losing irreplaceable time with their children during those short golden years. And they come out of the deal barely able to even cover the mortgage, while the CEOs are rolling in it. And then you put the pyramid that God has guided me to beside that one. This pyramid allows you to earn while doing what you actually love and sharing your light and inviting people in to this God-aligned way of living. To act on the whispers that cry, there's got to be a better way to live this life that doesn't crush my spirit, but liberates it. And you jump on board and money is funneling up the pyramid to other spirit-led people and eventually up to you. But what are they doing with this money from this passive income? Well, many are giving their children a better life with more of their presence. Many are sharing the abundance God is pouring into them through doing things like buying property and shipping containers to create safe refuges for mothers and children escaping domestic violence, and then rescuing horses to bring in to help the healing process. Like, incredibly breathtakingly beautiful stuff. Some are developing companies that help humanity and preserve nature, like the CEO of the company who provides this opportunity. And all are leading by example to show our brothers and sisters of this earth that it's possible to step into God's plan for you and break the shackles that have limited you. So please reach out if you want more information or you're ready to let God challenge and stretch you for your own growth and good.